So today we're going to talk about privacy and surveillance. Apologise again for the freezing coldness of the room. I think this is probably the most freezing room in the entire university. Really what we're going to talk about is some of the kind of contexts and problematics of the information society, of the kinds of things we've been investigating in seminar classes. And some of you may have come across this very cuddly animal that's been in the news a lot from yesterday, actually. So it's quite a convenient news story for us. And this, as you may be aware, is a teddy bear that is an Internet of Things teddy bear. That is, it has Wi-Fi, connects to the Internet, and can send messages by pressing the little button on its arm to somebody with a mobile phone. So I'll just give you a quick video of what the device does, and also so you can think about what could possibly go wrong in such a device. Oh, you may not have sound. Yeah, for some reason we don't seem to have sound, which is a bit annoying. Well, everything's connected, unless this is maybe broken. That's quite a shame actually, as I have actually got a few videos for a change. No, it's not seem to be working. Yeah, unfortunately we haven't got sound, so we'll have to just watch it without.
Saying goodbye can be hard. The ones you love seem so far. Now, staying in touch is easy and fun with Cloud Pets. Just record a message.
Hope you had a good day at school. I miss you.
And send to the cloud. In just seconds, it floats down to the app on your smart device, allowing you to send the message to the Cloud Pet.
Hope you had a good day at school. I miss you.
It's a message you can hug. Now, squeeze Puppy's paw to send her back.
Thanks, Daddy. Love you.
Cloud Pets makes you feel like the ones you love are always near.
See you real soon.
The Cloud Pets app uses Bluetooth technology to...
So, rather unsurprisingly, I suppose, this immediately became a target of hackers who found that it was completely insecure and they could break all aspects of that network there. And in fact, nearly 1 million emails and passwords have been leaked, and 2.2 million voice messages between children and their parents, etc., have been thrown onto the dark web. And this really kind of brings to the fore, I think, some of the kind of problematics raised in a society that's as connected as ours, with so many digital devices, so many digital networks, and such kind of invisibility of that infrastructure. Right, it's all around us, everything's connected, and it takes time for us to kind of work through the kind of privacy and surveillance implications that that raises. So, just a bit more context, we now start to get used to the idea that we're living in this age where information is growing, and a new kind of digital economy is starting to emerge, a knowledge economy. In fact, today, you may have seen in the news, or if not, you'll see later in the news, that the government has launched its new digital strategy for the UK, which is very interesting. If you're writing your concept note on the information society, you should go and have a look at that. And really, that does the kinds of stuff, or argues for the kinds of stuff that we've been talking about exactly on this course in previous weeks. So it talks about programming and computational thinking and the importance of those kinds of things in schools and universities. And it also talks about how people are going to make money from data, how we need new digital infrastructure, how you need new kinds of connectivity, and so on and so forth. So it's very timely, actually. Now, as I've said previously, this is all connected to this notion that data is the new oil of the digital age, right? Implying somehow that we're moving into a post-extractive society, a post-extractive economy, And in doing so, money is going to be generated by data. Now the question then is, who has the data? Well, of course, governments have some data, corporations have some data, but you, every single one of you, produce data all the time. And it turns out that that data is worth a lot of money. Hence the valuations of Uber, and Facebook, and Google, and so on and so forth, right? This is worth a lot of money. There's an entire political economy around this idea of data as the new oil. So you see that this creates, in a sense, a political and economic desire for data. This starts to shape the economy. This starts to shape the way corporations are responding to these kinds of problematics. And so, not only do we see the digital explosion of data, we talked about that a little bit last week, and the way in which interfaces are in some ways an attempt to control that kind of problematic, but also data becomes increasingly hard to contain. It leaks everywhere, right? It's very easy to copy, very easy to hack, and we're going to see many more examples of these kinds of problems over the next 5 to 10 years. And incidentally, the UK digital strategy also talked a lot about cyber and computer security as one of the big challenges. Because although there have been some very major leaks, I don't think we've yet seen one of the truly catastrophic ones, right? That's almost certainly to come. So, how can we think about these issues? Well, there are some terms that are used in the field. The notion of digital breadcrumbs, so you all know the story, is it Hansel and Gretel, I think, who go into the forest and they leave behind them a little trail of breadcrumbs so they can find their way back out to the forest, right? And of course the animals eat the breadcrumbs and the children can't find their way back out to the forest, and there's a whole story associated with that. So the notion of digital breadcrumbs, you leave trails of data in everything you do. And this is, you know, at a very fine granularity. It is shocking how fine the granularity is now, right? And that granularity is just going to intensify over the next 2 or 3 years as our mobile devices become much more sensitive to our movements and to the kinds of things we do. So digital breadcrumbs is one way of thinking about it. The other term that often gets used in the art is data exhaust. The notion that somehow, like a car, you have this kind of exhaust of data that you plough out into the atmosphere, right? And so this is captured by computation, captured by digital devices, and thus is able to be used as a kind of resource. Now, it's very important to note that information does have a time value, so timely capture of data is important, and there have been many situations whereby knowing things before other people know things mean you can buy and sell stuff, right? So actually, we're not just talking about the random kind of collection of data, just an unspecified collection of data. There's an intensity to it, a time criticality to it as well. So actually you get real-time collection of data and real-time analysis as much as you get these kind of big data sets that are, you know, the current thing that's being talked about a lot. Big data is really that thing that crops up everywhere at the moment. But we must also keep an eye on that kind of real time. Now, as I said, these raise some very serious issues for questions of privacy and for questions of surveillance, right? These devices, we just take them into the personal sphere, into the intimate sphere, into our homes, into our rooms, and you know, you tend not to think about the consequences of having essentially a mobile surveillance device next to your bedside table. These devices, remember, have multiple cameras. These devices have multiple microphones. The microphones are certainly on the more recent phone models, constantly listening. Other devices like the Echo, the Amazon Alexa product has also raised privacy issues, and I saw that Samsung now has a warning on its website which states, do not discuss anything of an intimate or private matter in front of your television. The implication being because it records everything you say and sends it back to Samsung HQ. Which is kind of a strange thing when you have to be scared about your television watching you and listening to you. We also saw this week that Amazon is being pursued by the police in the US because it records lots of information in the room that it's in, and someone committed murder where there was an Alexa, so they're trying to get the conversation out of Amazon. And again, these kind of unintended consequences of these constant recording devices is quite interesting. So we leave these digital breadcrumbs. Obviously, you're probably quite familiar with the notion that we're leaving these breadcrumbs on the internet, but actually we're leaving them everywhere, right? We walk across CCTV cameras, we walk across fields carrying our phones. This data is just constantly being collected and constantly being put into databases, right? Now, with the Snowden revelations, which I'm sure you're familiar with, Edward Snowden, so I didn't think it was worth showing you a whole video about Edward Snowden. But Edward Snowden in 2013 or so released a gigantic cache of very sensitive information about the National Security Agency in the US and about GCHQ in the UK, that's the two spying organisations, which demonstrated quite how sophisticated some of this spying had become. Right? Now, from an email address, for example, GCHQ and the NSA can search for you and find out where you've been, what websites you've looked at, if it's linked to your phone, what your most recent locations. I mean, like a serious amount of granularity of information. And of course, it also revealed the extent to which the NSA and GCHQ are sucking in information. They essentially have vacuum cleaners, if you like, attached to the giant international data cables, and they record everything that goes across those data cables. So it's comprehensive surveillance. And this is something that hasn't really been discussed democratically. People haven't really come to terms with what this kind of surveillance means and the kind of questions it raises for us. So, this gestures towards questions over public culture. You're all media and communications or media and cultural studies students, and the notion of public culture is very important in our discipline. The sensitivity of public culture and how public culture mediates politics and all sorts of aspects of contemporary society. Well, you can imagine this kind of surveillance strikes right at public culture in very profound ways. And raises real problems about how one, to quote Kant, uses or is able to exercise the public use of reason, right? Instead, if you feel like you're being monitored, if you feel that you're being recorded, you may be less willing to stand out, less willing to speak your mind, even at home, remembering that Alexa and your Samsung TV are recording you almost continually, right? So, this kind of chilling effect on our public discourse is another thing, again, that I don't think has been discussed and critiqued enough in public culture. So, how can we think about these issues? Well, it's generally thought that there's two ways of critiquing or questioning these problematics. So, the first is what's called the surveillance model. So, the surveillance model really is the one that you're most likely to come across, certainly in the academic literature. And this is the notion that you are being watched by Big Brother. There's a central system that really is drawn from notions of the secret police, but from Nazi Germany and so on and so forth, right? So you have this notion of the all-watching state. The second model is the so-called capture model. And this really comes out of the actual practices of the technologies of the 21st century. That is that digital systems work by recording stuff. Recording stuff in computerese is capture, right? Your phone captures data, your phone captures audio, your phone captures images, and so on and so forth. And the idea here is that this is a very different structure to this question of being watched, being monitored, and how those practices play out in various ways, right? And in fact, Philip Agre suggests actually it's more similar to the way in which Taylorist practices of workplace monitoring were undertaken, right? It's actually quite granular, and it's very much about activity and the kinds of activities you get up to. So let's dive into this a little bit. So again, you've probably come across this surveillance model somewhere along the way. Often it's taught on undergraduate courses, but really it comes from a notion of what's called the Panopticon. You more than likely have heard of the Panopticon, and particularly the work of Michel Foucault, who really popularised this notion. And this is the idea really that the Panopticon is a system of monitoring. System of monitoring and consequently a system of control. Again, just to say, one of the big problems of this is that it doesn't seem to kind of identify very well these 21st century practices. So one thing that isn't so clear in a kind of panopticon model is how one resists it. How does one avoid the panopticon? And you'll see what I mean when I show you the graphic in a second. Whereas in the capture model, it seems that there are some techniques that can stop the monitoring, stop the capture, and I point here to encryption and cryptography, for example, Tor, which some of you may have come across, and other techniques. Does anybody here encrypt their email? Not one person. If you do not encrypt your email, you are sending in what's called plain text. Anybody can read it. You're essentially sending postcards around the internet, right? And as I say, the university can read it, right? They collect all the email that's sent out through the university. GCHQ can read it, the NSA can read it. If there's a case that requires that email to be revealed, it can be revealed under a freedom of information request, for example. So the actual practices, we're very behind with the practices. We don't even think about encrypting our email, for example, and yet we use it in such a casual way. So the notion of panopticism is drawn from Foucault, as I said previously, but really the notion comes from Jeremy Bentham, a philosopher, and it was really about thinking about how to build a prison, the kind of ultimate prison of control. And the notion really is that how do you watch everybody, right? But more importantly, how do you watch everybody without them being able to watch you watching them? That's a very important part of this panopticon model. And the idea really is that by building systems or structures in a particular way, and in this particular model it's a circular structure, one is able to pick out anybody. So the lecture theatre, I suppose, operates a little bit like a panopticon, right? Because I can see every single one of you, but you can't see yourselves, right? It's harder for you to see each of yourselves. However, you can all see me. Well, that's why this isn't really a panopticon system. So in the tower, the prison that Jeremy Bentham describes, there's a light behind every prisoner in every cell so that one can see into them, and every move is visible to the guard. And this is, again, just to reiterate, the key point about it is it's constructed so that prisoners cannot tell if they're being watched. They can't see the guard. Right? They can't see the guard. And the reason for that is, if the prisoners can't see the guard, the prisoners don't know if they're being watched. And if they don't know when they are being watched, they have to continually act as if they are being watched. Which means, bizarrely, you don't need any prison officers, because the prisoners will always self-regulate, thinking they're being watched. Right, so it's got a very interesting dimension to it. So this is a graphic of what this looks like. So you can see in the centre there is the tower where the prison officers might sit, and then they can shine a light into any one of those cells and they can see all prisoners at all times. There's nowhere to hide. But the prisoners can't see back into the centre. They do not know if they are being watched. Now, Michel Foucault thought that was a very suggestive model of thinking about the 20th century model of surveillance, right? And the way in which society structured itself in particular ways to create or enforce self-control, self-policing. Michel Foucault said it puts a policeman on your shoulder because you feel like you're constantly being watched and therefore you regulate your behaviour. I'm not going to read all of the quotes, they're on the slides, you can read them at your leisure, but it is good to note that bit involved at the bottom there. The inmates know that they may be monitored at any time, so they will act at all times as though they were being monitored, becoming their own surveillance. That's the kind of smart and terrifying element of this model. So, as I've said, this has been a very widely used model to think about issues of privacy and surveillance. You really do see this everywhere in the literature, so you will come across it. The other suggestion from Phil Agre is this capture model, and this is perhaps, I think, more powerful, more interesting in relation to 21st century technologies, because this really identifies the model of surveillance with the model of the technology. It's very much linked to the specifics or the materialities of the technology and the way in which these technologies function. And that how through their functioning they change behaviour. They change behaviour at a granular level. They encourage self-tracking. They encourage self-monitoring. They give constant feedback, constant data, constant visualisation and aggregation of what you're doing. Are you exercising enough? Are you taking in too many calories? Are you sleeping enough? These devices are able to give this feedback continuously. And so, in a sense, we become informated people. Right? We're constantly given this informational feedback as we go through our lives. And of course, the capture of this information, as we've been talking about, is accelerating and intensifying. And it becomes integrated with wider systems, right? With everything being wired, the data doesn't just sit on your device, it becomes connected to other things. And then they are harvested by the companies that create these networks. So, for example, a kind of odd example of this, I suppose, is the way that Tesla has been developing autopilot so that the car drives itself. So all the cars send back their data on their drives back to Tesla. So that if one artificial intelligence in the car learns something about roads, all cars know it. Right? There's this very odd way in which there is no actual individual car. They're kind of like in Star Trek, the notion of, is it Star Trek? Was it Doctor Who? I forget. Whichever TV series it is, there's a notion of a Borg. I think it's Star Trek, actually. And there's this notion that everybody is of one mind. All data is shared by all the individuals. And it's a similar thing that's going on here. Now, for this to work, really, computers then have to know about where you are and what you're doing. So context starts to be the key way in which computers start to be manufactured. They have to be smarter. They have to know where you are. And some of you will have noticed your smart devices are starting to learn. They know when you're at university. They know when you're at work. They know your favourite cafes, your favourite restaurants. They can even suggest stuff ahead of you. Some of these apps now are smart enough to say, oh, you happen to like gourmet burgers. Well, you're in Paris, and there happens to be one around the corner. Right? Again, this is harvesting of your data and feeding information back to you. But this context is hugely important. Where are you? What are you doing? Right? What time is it? All this kind of stuff, these devices are starting to have to know in order for the capture model to really function properly. So these systems augment our practices, augment our abilities in various ways. And they may even move a little bit over augmentation and move towards automation. That is, they don't try to help you to think smarter or think quicker or do more stuff. They replace that by doing it for you. You don't have to think about where you might go, what you might eat. The device does that for you. Again, this slide pretty much summarises what we've talked about, so I won't read the whole slide out again. It is important, again, just to draw that distinction between the surveillance model with this notion of big brother, right? So the capture model doesn't have this necessity for big brother. In fact, some people talk about little brothers, lots of little brothers, so there's lots of devices, as it were, and it's a networked model of surveillance. The other thing that the capture model is useful for is it connects also to a political economy. So we come back to, well, actually, all this data, all this captured data becomes important because it can be sold. It becomes a commodity. Your personal data, which previously couldn't be captured because the devices didn't exist, now becomes part of an economy, a political economy, right? And again, Facebook and Google and all of these companies make a lot of money from knowing about you. They want to know as much about you as is possible, right? And not just what you feed into it, of course. I've said previously that Facebook has a very fine granularity of control over its website and its phone app, right? When you move the cursor around, it's tracking. It knows what you're moving the cursor to unconsciously, right? So if you move over t-shirts and you hover over t-shirts, it knows. If you move over that attractive person who's in class and hover over their photograph, it knows that you have an interest in that person. And it just takes a little note of it inside the system. Right? It's very, very creepy, the level of detailed analysis. And even when you type something into Facebook or whatever, whichever system, and then delete it, the system knows. It captures the deletion. It captures before you even send. It's monitoring. It knows ahead of time, right? It's very strange, and it's very hard for us to come to terms, I think, with this kind of new world. Now, this is problematic on a number of levels. Most of us are not happy with this level of tracking. We're not happy with being monitored 24/7 by digital devices. If we realise the extent of it, I think we would be pretty shocked. There's a famous case of a guy in Ireland whose Freedom of Information requested all of his data from Facebook, and being the kind of people they are at Facebook, they sent it all on paper, just to be really irritating. And it was, well, it would have filled this entire bottom half of the room down here. It was like millions of pages of just data. I mean, just crazy amounts. And what was interesting about it, because he actually went through the whole thing to try to find out what they actually store, what they keep. He was shocked to discover that they keep your deleted photos. Right? So when you delete photos from Facebook or other apps, they're not deleted. They just pretend they've been deleted. Right? They're kept. So these kind of companies, like to comprehensively keep data about us. The other reason I think it concerns us is because we tend to have a bifurcated existence. We have our private life, and we have our public life. And we have a notion that when we go into our house, and we shut the door, and we go into our room, we can just be ourselves. We don't have to think about what others think. And we may say things, or we may want to read things that maybe you don't want other people to know about. So the idea that actually you have no control of what's going out into the public sphere becomes really kind of problematic. When you are developing yourself as a person, when you're developing an idea about what you think, early on, you may not want necessarily that to leak out onto the internet and become who you are, right? So the way in which these systems work really kind of problematically attack our notion of what we are as human beings, and more importantly, social beings, how we manage ourselves out there in the world, right? That power, as it were, to become an identity, to decide who you want to be, is taken away and automated. The other thing is that they compromise our ability to manage how we present and define ourselves, right? So not just the kind of publicness of it, but actually our self-definition. Who are you, right? So there's those hundreds of questionnaire websites where people are always sharing them on Facebook, and they say, oh, what kind of geometric shape are you? Or what kind of Game of Thrones character are you? I know some people are very addicted to them. Now those systems are to find information out about you surreptitiously. They're asking questions about you to find out who you are, right? They're not just fun things. They're done for a reason, to capture information. And of course, they're very interesting as well, because sometimes they report back a person that you didn't think you were, right? You discover you are that horrible character in Game of Thrones who likes murdering people, right? So the self-definition, the kind of feedback of definition might become problematic in various ways. Now, Bernard Stiegler, a French philosopher, has done a lot of thinking about this, and he's come up with some very interesting notions, one of which is the idea of the programming industries. And of course, that should remind you of Adorno and Horkheimer's cultural industries, which you covered last year, I believe. And the idea is really that the programming industries are the new kind of cultural industry. Right? The new kind of cultural industry that is keen to not just collect, but also shape who you are and what the public is. And just a quick note, really, that of course, when we're talking about the data exhaust and digital breadcrumbs and all these kinds of terms, we're also gesturing towards stuff that we covered earlier on the course. It is algorithms, code, and software that's doing the work here. And as you know, a lot of that stuff's backgrounded. It's very hard to find out about. It's quite hard to dig into. It's a black box. And this raises particular questions and problematics. But do remember that these systems are mostly about selling you stuff, shaping your attention so that you find the new bright shiny object, the new chocolate bar, the new t-shirt design, so desirable that you'll click and buy it. Right? There's a whole political economy behind it. Okay, so I'm just going to go through very briefly because there's a lot of stuff on these next two slides, but it's more really about giving you some kind of background information. So this new world, this new capture world, this new digital informational economy or computational economy is pushing computation to the edge, right? New models of computation are emerging about it, and some of them I've listed here. So the notion of data close to compute, power at the edge, optical computing, the end of the motherboard, shared pools of everything. All these kinds of terms, these are the kind of very cutting edge of how these systems are starting to work. It's a very different world. And we're seeing, in fact, software being applied to software and software being applied to hardware, such that you're getting the softwarization of software, which is a very odd notion. But essentially, what you have are new kinds of structures of extremely rationalized and instrumentalized computing systems. The final thing I think we should really link to this is the importance of the network, of course. And networks have and remain a constraint on many of these systems, and the constant upgrade to new levels of technology is part of that. So actually, in the digital strategy that was announced today, the British government announced that 5G was going to be heavily invested in. 5G, of course, replacing the 4G that probably not all of you have got on your phones yet. How many people have got 4G on their phones? Oh, wow. You've all got 4G. Okay, so 4G is already old hat, right? 5G is on the way. And so getting the network faster is important with all this kind of data to be sent over it. So here's some of the kind of principles. I don't want to go through all of it, but to give you some notions of things that if you're interested you can go and Google and have a look at. So we've got, of course, context is the kind of framework, but things like schema on read, user-assembled analytics, and elastic computing are all very important parts of the technologies that are kind of making up this new landscape. Now, how do we respond to this? Well, this is a real kind of part of the problematic and real part of the kinds of things that we've been talking about a lot in this course. Phil Agre suggests that what we need to develop is what he calls critical technical practices. Critical technical practices. And we've talked about this in relation to computational thinking, but really this is the ability to, think beyond these systems, to actually critique them, to offer a response to them, maybe to resist them in particular ways. And And this is not easy at the moment, right? Because a lot of these systems are black boxes. It's actually very hard to have a clue about what's going on. Think about the teddy bear at the beginning. Who would have thought all the technical stuff that's going on behind that? And who would have realised how insecure it was? How much data it could leak out onto the web? People may not have been so keen to purchase it knowing this. Another just quick slide I just want to show you, but I'll leave you to read in detail. These numbers are, of course, out of date now. This was in 2013 when I was collecting some of these statistics. So in 2017, you can imagine many of these may well have doubled. But, for example, Google in 2009, so that was already out of date in 2012, 100 petabytes of data, 1 trillion URLs, 3 million servers, 7.2 billion views per day. I mean, these are crazy numbers. Facebook, they now have 1.5 billion users, I think, or 1.7 billion users. That's 2017 numbers. 300 petabytes of data, 500 terabytes per day. Just crazy numbers. Holds 35% of the world's photographs now. Pretty insane. YouTube, of course, gigantic amount of data, 1 exabyte. 72 hours of video uploaded per minute. I mean, it's just incredible the amount of stuff, really, we are uploading into these systems, and so on and so forth, through the different systems. Interesting that SMS is still generating 6.1 trillion text messages per year. Well, that was in 2013, of course, that will, of course, increase as well. So the amount of data we're generating is gigantic. You might be interested to know that these figures are mostly taken from the CIA, right? So we can probably trust that they know how much data is being is out there, because of course they have a real interest in this kind of stuff. So, quoting the CIA, the value of any piece of information is only known when you can connect it with someone else or something else that arrives at a future point in time. Since you can't connect dots you don't have, it drives us into a mode of trying to collect everything, and hang on to it forever. Right? So, stuff you are doing now, stuff you upload to a website when you're drunk, when you're sad, in a club, and you're rejected, right? Goes onto the web. The security services are collecting this stuff and keeping it, right? And in 30 years' time, when you're the Prime Minister, or whatever, it will be in your file, right? So it is a pretty scary thought, really. It really is very scary. And I've said previously that these systems are sucking huge amounts of data off the web, off the internet, off our phones. And this is happening all across, well, I don't know if you've heard of the term the Five Eyes, but the Five Eyes are the main constituents in this kind of system. Calling it the Five Eyes, and you couldn't come up with a more creepy name, could you? But they're called the Five Eyes anyway, so the NSA, GCHQ, the Australian Secret Service, what else is there? The New Zealand Secret Service, there's 5 of them anyway. Now, as The Guardian said, I haven't dated that, but I think that was probably 2014 or 2015, law is not keeping track. It's not keeping up with these changes. So the law that's being used to justify this kind of collection in Britain dates back to when you used to put crocodile clips onto copper wires. Right? The law is completely out of date, disconnected, right? So this is another big problem we face, right? The law does not offer you the kind of protections you might think you have. It really doesn't. And this is the same in the US as well, where the US protections are, have been, and Edward Snowden revealed this, have been undermined by many of these systems. Now, of course, being the high-tech nation, the nation that has the most advantage in terms of its technologies, the US has really been at the forefront of developing these systems, and the NSA, the National Security Agency, has built the most sophisticated, the most incredible systems of capture with the very strange name Bumblehive. Bumblehive is essentially a gigantic database in which they put everything they possibly can. And it's located in Utah in the desert, and it's a gigantic building, as you can imagine. So 2013, when the Snowden revelations came out, they were saying they'll have the capacity of 1 trillion terabytes, right? Or a quadrillion gigabytes, right? That would have doubled, almost certainly. So they have no problems with hard disk space, right? We're saving their photos. They have a lot of space. And again, this logic, this language, these are quotes from the CIA. If you're looking for a needle in the haystack, you need to have a haystack. Right? Such a strange language. So they are trying to make their haystacks so they can look for needles, which is a very odd way. It's an upside down way of thinking about these things. So the collection of data is just hugely important. Here's some data, 2013 numbers again, about the UK security agencies, how much data they're collecting. You can again see 600 million telephone calls a day in the UK that are being captured. Of course, all the stuff is digital. The phone conversations are digital. And 39 million gigabytes of internet traffic. I mean, these numbers are just absolutely crazy. Now, some have said that this is what we're moving to a world of what's called a machine-readable world. A machine-readable world. Machines, computers, are getting better at reading the world that we live in. Right? They're able to count things. I saw, should have put on a slide actually, I saw a great photo yesterday of carpooling surveillance cameras. Right? But, you know carpooling, where you share a lane when you go to the airport or whatever? They now use artificial intelligence to identify the cheating. So they're able to count the people in the car when you're driving along. If you don't have another person in the car with you, they fine you automatically. And of course, around London is the so-called ring of steel. The ring of steel is to stop terrorism. Of course, it's not a ring of steel. It's a ring of cameras and facial recognition and number plate recognition software. And that basically monitors all cars that goes in and out of the centre of London. These monitoring systems are very much about reading our world. So reading faces, reading all sorts of things about us. It's quite strange when you start looking into this stuff. So, for example, one of the best ways to identify a person isn't actually their face. It's the way they walk. So there are now sophisticated cameras that can see the way you walk across a room and can identify exactly who that person is without seeing much mouth. The way in which these systems work is very counterintuitive. So I've got a short little video that I want to show you, which is about this kind of machine-readable, robot-readable world. Now what you're going to see in this video is how computers are seeing our world. And you're going to see how they are developing their ability to discern objects and so on and so forth. That's of course a CCTV camera. more to that video, which I'll let you watch in your own time if you're interested. It's really worth watching the whole thing. It's quite creepy. So these systems are also being rolled out, and as the computer systems become more and more powerful, as the cameras become more and more powerful, you get all sorts of strange things happening. So an experiment in Baltimore in the USA from January last year, I think it's still running, essentially it has these super high resolution cameras over the whole of the city, and are recording it on video in real time, which has this very strange effect. And of course this is the police, Baltimore police, which are not noted, I don't think, for their careful race relations and so on and so forth. This police force are monitoring the whole city simultaneously. Think about that for a second. It's truly nothing, right? So from a very high resolution. And it's basically built on systems that were developed for Iraq and Afghanistan. So those wartime technologies are coming back home, as it were. And what this system allows you to do is that, let's say that someone is robbed on that street there. You can zoom into the street, right, and obviously see where the thing happened. But because you've recorded the video 24 hours a day, you can rewind the video and watch the person and watch them move all over Baltimore. You can watch them get on the public transport system, maybe go off, and eventually you find out where they live, just by rewinding the video. So this is a very terrifying kind of surveillance. And of course it uses facial recognition, it uses tracking technologies, and so on and so forth. And that's just the visual, right? The next example, which is about to start, if I can pause it for just a second. Oops. The next example is the kinds of technologies that are now being used in the US to monitor protests. So this was the Freddie Gray protest after he was murdered in police custody. And this is the system that the police now have to monitor in real time the people out protesting. And you can see each one of those little markers is somebody at the protest. And you'll watch now how the police are able to click on things and find out what's happening at every place.
Organizations of all kinds rely on Geopedia to uncover actionable social media content from the locations most important to them. In this short video, we'll show you just how quickly social content can be discovered. And although this real-life example will cover only the basics, you'll see that it has implications for public safety organizations, security groups, journalists, and much more. Right now, you can see that draw either a circle.
So it zooms in.
This will populate real-time social media content from all of these sources in just a matter of seconds. We can now explore search results on the map, or switch to an organized collage view.
So you see what he was doing there? He was literally clicking on people's social media as they were putting it in real time onto Facebook, onto Twitter, onto whatever, right? Pretty scary. So the last thing I just want to talk about very quickly is the question of who or what is being captured, right? And this is where we might want to drill in a little bit into the kind of so-called neutrality of many of these systems, who and what are being watched, who or what is being collected, and also the absences. Now, of course, the question of being made visible is, has been part of feminist theory for a while. And visibility and surveillance are gendered concepts, right? So the historical invisibility of women, for example, in the public sphere. But this can also be shown in other ways. Certain bodies, certain faces, certain ethnicities can be targeted for capture. So these kinds of facial recognition systems that look out for or identify certain kinds of anomalies, certain kinds of patterns, can also have certain kinds of racial overtones and certain kind of racialized problematics. Now what I want to show you, I can't remember if it's the next slide. All right. What I want to show you now is a very interesting guy called Zach Blas. He's been doing work about bringing forward these systems and trying to show how race, gender, and class, etc., are demonstrated in these systems. And he's produced this very wonderful piece of work called Face Cages, which really puts these biometric facial recognition systems onto people's faces. It's such a nice piece. I just wanted to show you as one of the last things. And really what he's trying to show is how these systems know who we are, right? These are actual facial recognition software calculations, but then they've been turned into physical masks that can be worn. So they act as a kind of demonstration of these systems. Again, you can have a look at more of this stuff on his website. He does loads of work around this. And I also just want to very briefly, I don't want to talk about that anymore, I don't want to talk about Barbie. Hello Barbie, we talked about in class for some of us, but you can look at these slides. Haven't got time to talk about surveillance, but I do want to just very quickly talk about this, which is that this response to these kind of surveillances are, for example, stealthware. So over here, this is clothing that won't show up to infrared cameras. So if you're being monitored on infrared, and this is makeup and hairstyling that stops facial recognition software from working, which is really interesting and has been used on protests. So protesters are now starting to put face makeup and cut their hairs in asymmetrical ways in order that you can see at the top there the facial recognition software doesn't function. Okay, so we are literally out of time pretty much. So I'll stop there and talk to you next in the seminar classes next week. See you later.